Hi, everybody. Welcome to my weekly cult situation report. I am Daniella, a scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership, and it is one hell of a time to be an expert on the bad guy. This is my report where I roll up everything that has happened in my world of cults and in the world of cults. I didn't do one last week, but you know what? We're just talking about what's relevant right now. Sorry about last week, folks. I was at a veteran protest, which I guess is what I can start with. I wrote a book called Uncultured about growing up in the Children of God religious cult and going into the cult of the U.S. Army. You can get signed copies attached here now. Yay! You can also see all these other fun, fuzzy stuff in my shop if you're interested. If you're on YouTube. Sorry for watching this on Patreon, but you know how to buy. Okay, so yeah, Friday I went to the Veterans Protest in DC's March 14th protest. It was interesting, like some thousands of people came out, met some people that follow me on different places there. That was fun, interesting. Was a little focused on we need to get him overturned as an invalid president because of the 14th Amendment, which I just think is not that likely to happen. I would like to have seen much more of a focus on protect veterans benefits, but there you have it. And that was the same day that JD Vance was mocking us, the disabled veteran community, for not having real jobs. The disabled veteran community. Sorry, U.S. military, you break it, you buy it. That's what you promised, y'all. That is what you promised. We're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about Elon Musk today, who is already backed off of Social Security. We'll get back to Elon Musk in a little bit. First, I want to talk about Rapture Culture and a lot of what I feel like is going on right now on both sides, but specifically concerning to me seeing it on the left. And I think what happens is that a bunch of us who grew up as apocalypse kids in Rapture Culture, first of all, that's a whole part of your psychology to explore and heal as you are in your decade of deconstruction. But we were not supposed to grow up, right? We were children that were being told we were going to die as martyrs in the end time. At least we were in the Children of God, and many, many, many other children in America, adults now, know what I'm talking about, right? You grew up with this rapture culture, and I think a lot of us who get into kind of social justice work on the left are doing this, are coming from this background, and we've rejected the religious part of it, but we haven't really deconstructed the actual rapture culture, right? This idea that the world is going to end, that we've been being messaged in so many ways for 3,000 years, and it's always the same. I'll never forget, I had this moment in college studying Jane Austen. And Jane Austen, of course, invented the marriage plot novel, which was satire of her society at the time, right? Social criticism. And the way it was being talked about, even just the novel in general, the way it was going to ruin society and ruin your daughters was so triggering to me as an apocalypse cult baby, because it was the same language. And I started to realize, oh, we do that over and over and over again in society. And so I think a lot of us right now are triggered by what's going on, right? A lot of us who have survived authoritarians and coercive control, whether that was in a cult, whether that was in your cult of churchianity, whether that was in your 1-1 cult, an abusive controlling relationship, whether that was in your single family cult that you grew up in, those are all things you could have been put into your psyche, right? That like it's all gonna end at some point. And I think it's important that we know that about ourselves, right? Like we're triggered right now. I've been figuring out some things in therapy. Like I'm low key, first of all, I'm pissed off. Like I fought for 35 years. I fought for 35 years, first to survive, then to escape, then to put my life together, then to fall apart, then to heal, then to put together my beautiful life that I live now. And then I got like 2 years to enjoy it. And now like we're back under authoritarian control, and I don't just get to like enjoy the nice part of my 30 years that I have left. I'm pretty pissed off about that, right? But also, I think there's an important thing about apocalypse babies, and though we might all be triggered right now, and it's going to be very helpful for us to realize that and realize where it shows up and how it's tied to the anxiety and the what I call apocalypticizing, almost fantasizing about the apocalypse, right? This is one thing we talked about this week on my channels, that like apocalypticizing is almost like religious suicidal ideation. Just like, oh, this world is not my home, but there's no place like home, and we can't wait. And all of the sacrifice and all of the stuff that will be promised after some space travel, the rapture, is all going to be better. I used to try to describe to my family like why soldiers wanted to go to war. And it's like, well, after you train for like 2 weeks to do your job, you want to do your job, right? Like, I trained for a year and a half to do my job. I want to do my job. But this is kind of the problem, is that cult members are not afraid of the apocalypse. They're prepared. They want it to happen. They want the world to end because they want to be right, and because they don't want to deal with life being painful. This can also be a reason why Christian nationalists don't care about saving the globe, because they want the world to burn, because then it means it's all over and they can go be with Jeebus in some promised paradise, right? Sacrificing the here and now for promises of some kind of loveliness after some space travel, right? And like, we see this rhetoric so much, this Armageddon apocalypse rhetoric, and it's very helpful to the tyrants, because what comes next? Oh, there's nothing we can do. Like, the amount of times I've been told there's nothing we can do. And this is the second part where it gets a little triggering for me, and it makes me kind of, I think, subconsciously a bit angry at Americans, because like, everything you're afraid of, people are being forced to live this way now. Some of them in this country, The other thing that many of us apocalypse kids have already survived is, well, labor camps in the Children of God, right? I was just a slave from the ages of, birth, but especially 11 to 15 with nothing else, no school, no nothing. You can read all about it in this book that is attached here. And it's like going straight to like the worst, right? Okay, I've survived a lot of that. The thought of fighting again is exhausting, but we can absolutely do it. Most people leave their cults eventually. But, survivors also tend to have very high suicide rates. Like, things are really difficult. And I hate to break it to you, but I don't think you're going to get a civil war. I don't think you're going to get martial law for all this persecution fantasy. We're just going to slowly become more and more like dictatorship Latin American countries. And that's already well on its way, right? And so, now this is me putting on like my intelligence officer hat, and like, the other reason that you imagine the worst case scenario, because as an intelligence officer giving threat briefs from missions, right, this is what we do. We tell you the most likely, here's what we think is going to happen, and then we tell you the most dangerous, right? And the reason for that is so you imagine, what would you do? Okay, so there are labor camps. Okay, so they're forcing hairstyles. Okay, so there's martial law. Like, even though, again, I remind you, there's no way to militarily control 340 million people with 2 million people, especially in a country as large and diverse as America, with borders that can't be shut and easily accessible oceans. Okay. But if that's what you're afraid of, okay, what is your response? It doesn't just end. People are like, oh, he's just not going to leave office and be a dictator. Oh. And then what? You're just going to sit down and yield? So I've been asked over and over again since the election, right? How do we survive in a cult that we can't just leave? Which is what living under a tyrannical government is. And my answer has been, you survive and you resist. And I focus mostly on resistance and what that means. Color is an important part of resistance. Not complying in advance is an important part of resistance. Exactly because there are jackasses like me on the internet talking about how bad they are makes it harder for them to come control us. I studied in Germany in college. Germans are lovely, lovely, lovely people. And they are also very, very rule-loving people. And folks who studied the Holocaust know that it couldn't have happened anywhere else, in large part because of the way people are in different places. And Americans are jackasses. That's how we're known around the world. And that's going to be part of what saves us. We don't do what we are told. It's definitely this kind of analogy of like, there's a place where I go get my nails done. This month was red because tyrants hate red when they cannot control it. And this ATM, because you have to get money to, tip in cash, and this ATM has a little pasted on sign that says $160 max. And I'm always kind of chuckling to myself as I'm taking out $200, which is the max that the machine actually allows. Because this isn't what Americans do, right? In Germany, you'd probably be fine. Everyone would take out $160. And in America, you either force us to comply by making that the max the machine will give you, or we're going to do what we want. And that is part of the saving grace, right? So cause good trouble, right? Continue to cause good trouble. So there's lots of ways we can do on the resistance, but also the survive part, right? And part of surviving really, really, really shitty situations is you still have to find community. You still have to find joy, right? Children being herded into camps and children being locked into ghettos and children in the camps were putting on plays for each other and for the adults. Women were reciting stories that they had read to each other to keep each other alive and not losing hope because they want you in a panic. There's a reason that apocalypse psychology works for coercive control. Because if you think there's nothing you can do, you're going to do nothing. And in A Man's Search for Meaning, which is about the Holocaust, this psychologist, his name's not going to come to me, and that's really, really, really going to bother me, but I'm sure one of you will add it here. But he says that, he started to be able to identify in the camps when people would lose hope, when they would just give up, they would be gone within 24 hours. So for me, it has been a little bit triggering to be like, I've survived a lot of really awful shit. And I've been to war. We're gonna, and people are like, are we gonna survive? Walk out of your house, go do whatever chicanery you were doing today or yesterday, and you're still gonna be doing tomorrow. I just punctured my thumb with a knitting needle. It's never fun when that happens. And find the joy and find the community, because imagine the worst case scenario. We're not all just going to sit down and die. We're going to have to keep surviving. We're going to have to keep pushing back. So we can survive it. Ask me how I know. Okay, so we also talked this week, because I was talking about Rapture Culture, and I mentioned, zombie apocalypse is a little bit white supremacy fanfic. And people wanted to know more about that. And I had a very interesting experience the first time someone said that to me, or the first time I heard that said. I believe it was on social media. And I was like, I just knew it in my bones. It's not something I have to argue with people about. And you'll just know it. And it's one of those things, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And I knew it in my bones, but I didn't know the answer. So I did what we should all do in these situations. And generally for questions about America right now, is I went and listened to Black women who very easily explained that when you subhumanize a certain population, and then it's visible to the eye how different they are, which fits very well with the stuff that I study and talk about, which is, this is what we do as humans. We otherize, and then the other becomes the enemy. And then we unalive the enemy. We kill the enemy. Sorry, my TikTok language getting me there a little bit. right? And this is kind of how it goes, I think. I'm hoping this is just under patriarchal and capitalist and white supremacist systems, and that we can act, this is not actually the disease of humanity to stack rank and then kill the ones at the bottom, but I mean, it's been pretty bad so far. So anyway, just wanted to break your brain on that for a little bit, and hopefully you can read deeper into that all you want. Good news from yesterday was every Cybertruck ever sold has been recalled because Elon Musk is an absolute piece of garbage. And it was found out that $1.6 billion of unaccounted for spending in Tesla. Canada is also coming after Tesla for fraud, and it is going to be very fun for me as Trump and Fallon 47 discover that they do not, in fact, rule the world. And also, I feel like this. Nobody made Elon Musk go out and become the most hated man alive, but now we're all going to enjoy his suffering and this feeling, the Germans named it, schadenfreude. But it's a funny thing about cult leaders and dictators and tyrants is that they all study each other, right? And they all know that they're like manipulating and doing bad stuff. But I think they all drink the Kool-Aid, I call it sampling the Kool-Aid, like just enough for them to believe that they're the one that's going to be different. And so it's funny to me because the reason you're supposed to study bad guys and tyrants is to spot the patterns. And I also know the patterns of how you're beaten. And I've been knowing that the IRS is the one that took Al Capone down since I was a child because our cult leader taught us that. And by the way, this is how you go after cults, for labor trafficking, because cults are all about labor. People try to go after them for other kinds of abuses, and it's very hard to get people for abuses in a patriarchy like ours. Go after them for exploitation of labor. You might have to do some deconstruction to get there, figure out how that was, but it's always there, trust me. In AA, what they do is they have newly sober members of the cult work for free or very, very, very low pay in existing members' businesses. And it's a big part of how they traffic labor. They do other kinds of trafficking as well. Okay. So, yeah. Cults always promise space travel. I mentioned that several times, and some of this is becoming more and more relevant. And it's funny, and this week a lot of people have told me, like, oh, yeah, as soon as I realized that, like, now I realize Seventh-day Adventism is a cult. And I'm like, yep, and these models that I come up with, they work because they work. As he who shall not be named says, we'll talk about him next, if it's valid, it stands up to scrutiny. So I've been thinking about the space travel thing for a long time because there's a lot of cults that are obsessed with aliens and space travel and Heavenly City being inside the moon. That was the Children of God, right? All this stuff. And then, like, I didn't have the language for it when Donald Trump started the Space Force, but I was like, oh my God, it's culty, it's culty, it's culty, it's culty. And then since then, I've figured out how to talk about it. But I sat and I thought for a very long time, and I think it is actually crucial to coercive control, that you are promising something that will only be delivered in another lifetime, in another body, in another dimension, in another phase, on another planet, etc., right? Because two reasons. One, if people reach enlightenment, they won't need you anymore. And two, because you know it's a con. The cult leader does know it's a con. I firmly believe the stereotype of it started off good and turned out bad is just part of the con. This is one of the things cult babies bring to the table. And speaking of things cult babies bring to the table, the bite model of understanding cults has helped many. It has helped many, many people. And also, Dr. Stephen Hassan is a raging homophobe and transphobe who recently came out with a bunch of ridiculousness. But one of them was fully selling his soul to J.K. Rowling to say that trans identity is a cult. And unfortunately, other cult babies and psychologists who should know better are also kind of supporting him in this. Trans identity is an identity. An identity is not a group. It is not a movement. It is an identity, and it cannot be a cult. So either you're not a very good cult expert, or you're just choosing evil. But another thing that I couldn't really explain at the beginning of the dehumanization of trans people, because I hadn't thought about it too much and I didn't know that I had trans people in my life that I loved. But even then, studying group behavior, I was like, nope, I don't like these bans. I don't like this women's sports talk, because as soon as we start banning people from stuff, it doesn't take too long until we start to kill them. This is what human groups have taught us. So, in good news, trans people can't be kicked out of the military. He was blocked. And part of what I'm getting so upset about is people keep saying nobody's stopping him, when actually he's being stopped in most of the things he's trying to do. Welcome to the quiet work of government and routinization. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. Back to trans identity. One cannot be a cult. But he didn't stop there. He then started to say how trans identity is a high-level government psyop. At which point, no, we're not colleagues anymore. I have lost every grain of respect for you, because nobody, as a former Army captain intelligence officer, let me promise you that nobody who knows anything about high-level government psyops is talking to you about high-level government psyops. And that's a super conspiracy theorist cult leader thing to do, and he knows that because he studies this stuff. So, unfortunately, I mean, if the BITE model works, it works. If it's valid, it stands up to scrutiny. He, however, does not stand up to scrutiny. Moving on to the boring work of government and routinization. So you all know that I compare things to cults. That's a huge part of my job. And also that I am the first cult scholar who was not given the military their cult exemption, and the first one that we know of with military experience. However, the military is a cult that answers to an idea, and that idea is the American Constitution, not the President of the United States. Secondly, I also believe that America is pretty much a cult, and I am almost done writing a book called The Culting of America. We'll have some updates on that in a little bit. And also, America is a cult led by an idea, and America also has what in cults we call routinization, okay? Mormons are the textbook example of this, right? You have the charismatic con man, Joseph Smith, who comes up, right? But then he builds an organization, and people can't run organizations by themselves. It's hard to personally manage more than 5 people, actually. There's a lot of group theory. So cults are hierarchical organizations, usually by definition. Cults that are not one-one cults or single-family cults. There's a leadership hierarchy. There always is, even if they say there isn't. AA looking hard at you. But the thing at the top that's leading can be a charismatic person or an idea. I believe that Mormonism was started as a cult personality, charismatic Joseph Smith, but then was transitioned over to an idea, the idea that we are the one true church. Cults that are led by an idea can be handed down much more easily than cults that are led by personalities, although that can happen too. It's far less likely to be successful. It's certainly not going to happen to Shady Vance, who has the charisma of someone who puts his cast iron in the dishwasher. Okay, but cults that are led by an idea. Okay, so then they start routinizing, right? These people that you put in around you to help you run the organization are bureaucrats, and bureaucrats bureaucrat. So they start writing things down. They start making rules. They start telling you exactly what the sacred Jesus jammies must look like and where you must buy them from the church, right? We used to think routinization took you from being a cult to being a religion. We now know that is not true. We know that Mormons are a cult despite routinization. And we know the thing called charisma by proxy. The charisma is because the cult is led by the idea. And by the way, I remind you, the charismatic authority does not mean charming. It simply means you're not controlling us by force. We have given authority over ourselves to you. So people give themselves over to Mormonism, or are born into it, ideologically give themselves over to it, the idea that they are the one true church, and then they follow the leaderships that the Mormons have put into place. And what I think is important to understand here is, Donald Trump wants to be a dictator, right? I have been saying this since 2015, and not for my health. He wants to be an absolute tyrant, absolute control. Yeah, that's how we all feel about it. Yeah, good boy. The dog's a Republican. It's a problem. Okay, so he wants to be. I don't think he's going to be successful for a lot of reasons that I talk about all the time on my channels. But one is because the cult of America and the cult of the U.S. military has 248 years of routinization. Specifically, both our country and the military, making many redundancies, making it rely on many thousands of people to run. The military, you have to get your guns from one part of the base, and then you have to go get your ammo from another part of the base. On purpose. They don't have to do that. They could make it easier. They don't, because part of the goal is to make it hard to grab this ship and steer it by yourself, right? So I'm not saying we should not be afraid. I'm saying I don't think he's going to pull it off. It's going to be horrible. He's going to pull off a lot of really bad things, and I think we are going to be paying for this for generations to come. But I don't think he's going to pull off being a dictator for life. Okay. We will all see, though. Nobody knows what is going to happen right now. That's why we're all here listening to a cult scholar about national politics. Okay. And of course, they're calling women on the left. What? Is it original? Is it interesting? No, it's witches. Again, the same thing they've always been doing. Because woman in total control of herself is the scariest thing to them. Get it? Woman in total control of herself. She's a witch! They are afraid. And this is part of how we know that they are losing. As your friendly neighborhood threat officer, I promise you, nobody is this afraid when they are winning. When you're in a fight that you're winning, or when you know that you are planning a mission that you outnumber 3-1 and you have all the weapons and all the air superiority, you're not that afraid. Anyways, it's important to note that even though this is tired and old rhetoric, it's also dangerous rhetoric because of the aforementioned labeling the other and then the enemy, and then what we like to do to enemies. So we all need to push back against this kind of stuff. Whew. This was a lot of things. There's more things that I've missed. I'm sorry. I'll try to respond to questions about specific things if you have them. I'm trying to spend more time on YouTube and Patreon and do more longer videos and more shorts because these platforms are a bit more stable than others. So yeah. Okay. The 2 podcast episodes that were released this week, I have 2 podcasts. One is called Cults and the Culting of America, and one is called Hey White Women, where a black woman named White Woman Whisperer and I are deconstructing white supremacy like the cult that it is. So in this conversation, Daniella and Rebecca delve into the complexities of cult dynamics, particularly focusing on the Nation of Islam. They explore personal experiences with cults, the intersection of race and cults, and the societal responses to this group. This discussion highlights the role of white women in these conversations, the importance of listening and learning from diverse experiences, and the manipulative tactics employed by cults. Okay, this keeps going, but I'm just going to say some of the stuff, because that's one of the things in a sit rep I haven't done. is so I made some videos on Nation of Islam because someone who was a survivor asked me to talk about it. And Nation of Islam is a cult that rose out of the 1930s. One of the things that I think is very, very important to discuss when talking about black cults is that the us versus them component, which is number 7 on my 10-part list, is powerful. It's real, but it's powerful, right? So in like a white-led cult in America, we usually see this kind of us versus them that is not real, right? Christians are not being persecuted in America, but black people are being persecuted in America. White America does hate them. And so predators can show up and use this to pull people in. When I first started talking about cults, I was asked to please not talk about black groups, and I didn't for a while. I listened and I learned and I continued to develop my own expertise. But at this point, I do feel comfortable speaking on the Nation of Islam, and it is considered a cult by most people in the field, but also always giving the nod to the fact that cults have been largely defined by white Western academics, especially Americans. But one of the things for me as a cult baby is I know cult baby language. So when I'm speaking to survivors of Nation of Islam, which I've done extensively, because of course I'm not giving my opinion on a thing I haven't actually studied like any good social scientist, and a big part of how we do in this genre is listening to survivor stories. And they have the same cult baby stories that I do, exactly the same. And that's how I know it's a cult, right? I gave this talk this week on exploitation of children and actually need to do a little roll up on that. Oh no, I paused to put that note down and I forgot what I was saying and I can't go back and watch it. The ADHD. Okay, so why was I talking about the exploitation of children? We were talking about, I don't know, but I have started to do this thing now with some of the big groups that I speak about a lot that are high control systems, as well as what I think also qualifies them as cults. Large groups like the military, like AA, like some Catholics, like Mormons, like Seventh-day Adventists, like Jehovah's Witnesses, is, when they try to come at me about what defines them a cult, I just say, what, in your opinion, what makes the Children of God an obvious cult? Or Scientology? And here, let me hold up to you this mirror, right? You can call it whatever you want to, but your people are coming out with the same trauma. And because I understand, oh yeah, this is what I was saying in the exploitation brief, I talk about like how, I, of course, have this definition of cults that I have made and validated and blah, blah, blah. But also, as a cult baby, I hate your cult definition. I hate my cult definition, especially when you put it into a cute little 10-part listicle. Because cults are going to take that and use that to program their members, especially the children, about how they're not a cult so that the children can go defend against it. Okay, but we know that we're going to argue about the definition of cult for the rest of our lives. But this is where we go back to Daniella studied literature and language first. What do we mean when we use the word cult? When we're using a word, it means something inherently. That's why we're using it. And I think what we're trying to say when we say someone is in a cult is that they have come under coercive control and they're not now operating and, making their own decisions, right? So we understand that, and we understand that cults are all about coercing and manipulating you to get your labor. Then we understand very clearly that cults are criminal enterprises and that cult survivors have all of this same trauma and cult babies have all of the same trauma all the time. So at the end of the day, I really, really, really do not care what is called a cult. But also, I'm no longer going to stay out of discussing black cults because it's important to bring those into the conversation. Actually, this month in Cult Book Club, we are reading The Community by Jamelia Chisholm, and it is about her experience in the Nubian Nation, a black Muslim cult. And I have never read anything that described my own childhood in a white Christian cult that described it better, including my own book. So, like, I really like to put that contrast together and be like, they're not different. They're not using different strategies. It is the same strategy every time, different flavor. And I think I am expert enough to evaluate all kinds of different cults while also understanding that there are important things about Black culture to understand about Black cults and how they then manipulate people, etc., and vice versa. Just like there's important things to understand about all the people's culture that are drawn into cults, right? Really important stuff to understand about white people and our lack of culture and why we're pulled into so many cults too, because we've given up community for whiteness. Oh, I started reading more about Slovakia and Slovakian history this week as I'm deconstructing my own white Americanness and figuring out my actual roots. So that was the episode of Hey White Women, and then episodes of Cults and Culting of America. We usually have guests on, and we didn't have a guest scheduled this week, so Scott and I just kind of got to do a check-in on the Cult of America and what's going on right now. Scott is a survivor of the International Pentecostal Church of Christ, something like that. Many of you all ask me about it all the time. And we just had a good conversation about what's going on right now. We explore the current political climate in the U.S. and its parallels to cult dynamics. We discuss the rise of cult mentality, the deification of leaders, becoming godlike, and the implications of executive power. The conversation emphasizes the importance of community, collective action, and the role of art in resisting oppressive governance. So the host encouraged hosts to engage with their communities and resist fear-driven narratives, highlighting the need for resilience and creativity in challenging times. And remember, we were talking about survive and resist, right? And a big part of surviving is finding joy in the life that you are currently leading now, no matter what those conditions are, so that you can get to the next part. I did a very difficult presentation on child exploitation. It was called Off the Compound in Plain Sight. I have posted just me giving it, you don't get to see the slides, on my YouTube page if anyone is interested. Big point of it for me has always been that there's a reason that the people in power and religious groups specifically want you to think of child trafficking in one certain way. And they don't want you to think of the shiny, happy, religious child trafficking. I don't know how much more I want to recap going into it because it was very emotional and intense for me to talk about what I went through and how this goes on all the time in America. But go check out that video if you are interested. I'm wearing a lavender scarf again, and big lavender hoop earrings. Okay, and got a little tantric yoga guru exploitation in the UK. The Tara Yoga Centre in London and Oxford, led by Gregorian Bivolaru, has been exposed for manipulating members under the guise of tantric yoga. Yawn. Bivolaru, wanted by Interpol for charges including sexual exploitation and human trafficking, led the movement for spiritual integration into the absolute, Misa. Members were coerced into strict adherence and submission, facing situations like sexual encounters described as spiritual initiation. In 2023, the French police arrested Bivolaru on multiple charges, highlighting the cult-like control exercised over its members. And really important to remember, cults do not have to be religious. You can use any ideology to radicalize people. You can literally write a sci-fi novel and make it the basis of your cult. We call that Scientology. So these things happen. I love to tell people that anywhere in the space of personal transformation, of which exercise and meditation and finding your spirituality and education and diet culture and all of these things, even just moving, predators will show up. And also just reading this and being like, I was found for sexual exploitation and human trafficking. Yawn. This is why I say that as cult babies, I think that we do maybe just understand bad organizations better, even than some people who study them, who've been inside of them, but didn't grow up speaking them. Because I just know, you can put me in any of these cults and I could point you to where the sexual and financial exploitation is happening. I know. And when people say, this came up in the Nation of Islam discussion, when you say I grew up in, and the next words aren't locational data, I maybe had a little bit more of a cult baby childhood than you think you do. So come join our communities. We talk about this stuff all the time. This month in book club, we just closed out the book clubs for this month. So we discussed Mike Rinder's A Billion Years, Scientology. And then this week in cult theory, usually one is more discussing the book and one is more discussing just like topics and deconstructing. And surprise, surprise, Cult Memoir Book Club is a support group for cult survivors in large part. So we closed out Janja Lalich's Take Back Your Life, which is a wonderful, wonderful book. And we talked specifically about the cult baby experience, children born in cults, families in cults, what it does to your family, and how often you don't know how to be a family afterwards, and then individuals have to deconstruct, and there's so much that goes on. Dr. Janja Lalich has a wonderful, wonderful other book called Escaping Utopia. Both of these are going to be tagged here. You can get Escaping Utopia. She talked to tons and tons and tons of cult babies and then wrote a super, super helpful book about it. So if you are in your decade of deconstruction as someone who was born and raised in a coercive group, I highly recommend both of these books, but Escaping Utopia blew my mind. I read it, I took notes, I sent it to my mom, who was also born and raised in the cult, so she could have the book with my notes. And I'm going to see her in Dallas soon, and maybe some of you all, and I'm excited to get that book back. I will be in Dallas in April. On April 15th, we're going to have a Knitting Cult happy hour in a location to be announced, probably somewhere around Richardson, Texas, where I went to UT Dallas for college. I'm going to be there in a week I'm going to be there for personal reasons, but I like to do an event when I travel. So if you are Dallas or Oklahoma or want to drive in and come to our Knitting Cult happy hour, the link will be in the descriptions. Please sign up for the Eventbrite tickets. They're free. That's just how we're going to push out the information. There was one more thing. Oh, book club. Okay, so so that's what we did for book club. Next month, again, we are reading Jamelia Chisholm's The Community. As the memoir, it is on audio. It's very good on audio. You join a book club by going to become a member at the $10 a month level on Patreon. You get access to both book clubs. So we are moving on to Terror, Love, and Brainwashing by Dr. Alexandra Stein, who studies both the Holocaust and cults. This is going to be very, very good stuff. These book clubs are not college courses. I am not your professor. You do not have to do the reading, and you are still more than welcome to show up and will likely get a lot out of the discussion. Okay, Culting of America updates. I know, I'm sorry, you all. Books it takes a long time to write a good book. I was really, really hoping we were going to get it out this year, and we were maybe going to pull it off. And then Mr. Knitting Cult Lady broke his arm, and when you have a 50% partner who suddenly becomes disabled, it shakes things a little bit, and I don't think that is going to be pull-offable. I think my new trying to get everything complete date by is going to be by Memorial Day weekend, which is also my birthday, and Mr. Knitting Cult Lady's college graduation. I don't know if that means we can shorten up the production and still get it out by the end of the year, but definitely we are working as hard as we can. I am still in the editing and adding research part of chapter 9, which is entrance costs and exit costs. Then all I have left to do is chapter 10, the end justifies the means. Chapter 11, just groups, where I tell you about how going to an Eras tour could be a potential cult induction situation, but also that doesn't matter if there's nobody waiting there to coerce you. One of the questions I get asked a lot is, how do you build an organization that's not a cult? And my very simple answer is, don't coerce and manipulate people and exploit their labor. And now for some nitpicking. Of course, this is the initial cult coat that I'm wearing. The pattern for that is in the Culty Knitting Patterns book, which is also tagged here if you're interested. It's just a PDF you can download for $5.99. Has a bunch of my fun patterns. This is one of my scarfigans that I'm making. It's the first one of what I offer, where like you send me a scarf that you know and love, and I'll turn it into a cardigan for you with crocheted or knitted sleeves. Crocheted sleeves take a bit longer. I should probably charge more for them. But anyways, I love orange and green, so it's going to transition here to orange and green yarn and then bright orange yarn at the end. It's going to be super pretty, and I have an orange and green necklace that I'm sending her along with it just for fun. May or may not be done by the next time we talk. I'm doing here another pair of fuzzy pants, and then I take the legs that I cut off and I use it for sleeves on a scarfigan, so it's like a whole outfit. And I'm making these for one of my friends. Some pants I have outgrown. Here is a scarfigan, the style of which Knitting Cult Baby has named the Love-again. I take these warm scarves and just cut holes and put sleeves on. This is one of my Afghanistan scarves, and that I also wore for my TED Talk. So that one's for me. We kind of matching Knitting Cult Baby. I am just having fun putting yarn on necklaces and making things with that. I've started to put some things in my shop on YouTube if you're interested. I invented the hair control fuzzy hair tie. I'm actually wearing purple ones that match this jacket, but my hair is not good for showing that off. Also been making these mermaid earrings with mesh metal chainmail. And why mermaids is culty is because we weren't allowed to watch a lot of media, but we were allowed to watch Little Mermaid because they said it was a Christ story, and the lesson was that he sacrifices himself for his daughter. But the lesson I took away was that she got away from you in the end. Look at this platinum silver scrunchie. I'm doing these little balls, and these are going to be fuzzy logic earrings. So the big ones I call circular logic earrings, and then for the babies, you have fuzzy logic earrings. And look, this is like, are you Glinda or are you Elphaba? Yeah, my kid has already worn these to school. Her hair got a lot of compliments. And what else? This one's really fun. So these are all the things I have been doing with my craftiness this week, and hopefully you all enjoy it. I'm going to be doing, actually with the book, I'm going to be doing some bundles where you can like get a signed copy of a book and get 3 hair control ties, scrunchies, or get a book and a fuzzy headband, or a book and some circular logic earrings. So check out my shop if you're interested. I am Daniella, scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership, author of Uncultured, book about growing up in the Children of God religious cult, going into the cult of the U.S. Army. You can get signed copies attached here. I am, as ever, your friendly neighborhood scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership, and this has been my situation report. See you next Friday.